Well, on it goes, the coalition continuing to try to hurt the Australians who can least afford it. Happy to let the big end of town go without paying the tax that they should rightly be paying, and instead attacking the most vulnerable people in our society. That really sums up the ideological bent of this coalition government. It has continued from day one and it continues today. And what we have seen today is this belligerent attempt to ram this legislation through at any cost without any consideration for what came through in the recent inquiry into the Omnibus Bill by the Senate Community Affairs Committee. In that, of course, clearly Labor listened to the evidence provided, and it was of no other conclusion that we could draw but to provide a dissenting report to that inquiry into that bill of which is now being split into two, and a lot of which is now before us in this bill we are debating, in the sense that we could not support it because we made it very clear that how can we, in listening to all of that evidence that was put forward, listening to reading the submissions that were put forward that reiterated the evidence to reject the cuts that are included in this bill. Why? Because of their impact on low and middle-income families. In particular, we are talking about single parents, pensioners, job seekers, young people, people with disabilities and carers. These are the people that this government wants to attack. These are the people that this government wants to make life harder for, let alone not even acknowledging how hard they are currently doing it. It wants to make it even harder. And what does that actually mean? Well, for a young person who may be on New Start allowance, they will now have to wait up to 5 weeks before they can get any kind of income. Now, where is the fairness in that, Mr Acting Deputy President? Where is the fairness in that? Again, of course, there are cuts to paid parental leave, leaving 70,000 mums in Australia, new mums, worse off. Where is the fairness in that? There is no fairness in the measures that this government puts forward. There is simply pain and suffering and hurt to some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Having to wait 5 weeks for New Start allowance, forcing young people to live off nothing for 5 weeks. What is that going to do to our homelessness levels in this country? What is that going to do to those suffering mental illness in this country who need the support of their state to do the right thing and provide that safety net for them? Well, Labor will never support such unjust and unfair laws that will hurt the most vulnerable in our society, and that's why we strongly oppose and condemn these hurtful changes. Now, instead, if the government needs to find revenue, we are all up for that. We are all up for working with the government in how it needs to find revenue for its budget. Because we know that each day, as each day passes, the government's budget deficit keeps blowing out of control, something you never hear them talking about anymore. It has increased astronomically since 2013, since the Liberals took office. But of course they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about where they can find genuine savings that don't hurt the most vulnerable in our society, because they don't understand what it means to be vulnerable. At least we know the Prime Minister doesn't. Instead of looking at the big end of town, instead of looking at making sure multinationals pay their fair share of tax, instead of looking at the fact that their corporate tax cut ideological policy is simply ludicrous in providing $8 billion a year more to the budget bottom line and giving corporations a big tax cut, instead of looking at all of that and making sure that they can ensure that multinationals pay their fair share of tax, that this isn't the time to give corporations a big tax cut. They don't want to do any of that. They want to go straight to single parents, to people on a disability, to people seeking New Start, to young people, to job seekers, to aged pensioners. They're the people that they're focusing on. They're the people that they're attacking. That's their way of finding money for the budget, by cutting the basic means by which a lot of these people try to make ends meet and get that leg up so that they can get back into the job market or make their life decent and meaningful and live with some kind of dignity. It's the dignity, in fact, that they're taking away from them. And that is absolutely outrageous. And it's not something that Labor would ever support. And of course, it doesn't even just stop at some of the measures that are in this bill, even though this is certainly bad enough. It has been going on now for some years, what this government has done in relation to cuts to some of the most vulnerable. We only have to look at community legal centres, which we know are used by some of the poorest people in the country. Community legal centres turned away around 160,000 people per year due to a lack of resources. Now, why do they have a lack of resources? Well, they're facing a 30% cut from the 1st of July this year. Now, again, this is something that should be a mainstay in our society, to be able to access legal support. And of course, there isn't enough money also in that realm in relation to family violence support, something that I think both sides of this chamber agree needs a further focus on, so that we can actually end family violence in this country and its effect on so many women and children. Also, if you look at the clients that access community legal centres, 50% of those clients receive government benefits. So if they are 50% receiving government benefits, we know already that they are some of the most vulnerable people. Why, I ask, why is our government in this country trying to hurt the Australians who can least afford it? They are the questions that Australians are asking out there on the streets. They're not asking, gee, we need to reform our Racial Discrimination Act. We need to, make sure our Racial Discrimination Act is reformed so that we have more of a right to be a bigot. We think our Racial Discrimination Act doesn't give us enough free speech. That is not what Australians are talking about on the streets. And I mean, if the government would actually listen to Australians, actually, hold a town forum like our leader does on so many occasions and actually listen to the people, they would actually find out how out of touch they are. They would actually find out that the idea of cutting family payment, cutting pensions, attacking the rights of people with disabilities, people accessing community legal centres, people needing family violence support, that is what people want. They want to ensure their government is providing those basic services that governments should provide for. But instead, this government is living in some kind of Canberra bubble where it thinks, well, what are we going to do today? Oh, how about we bring the Racial Discrimination Act back on the agenda? It's only been 3 years since we did it last time. Why don't we bring it back on again? We've got a different Prime Minister now. Maybe we can convince him to move on this, despite the numerous times Prime Minister Turnbull has said he would not make changes to the Racial Discrimination Act. At least slight kind of moment of wisdom that former Prime Minister Tony Abbott did kind of occupy himself with was when he threw out the idea of making changes to the Racial Discrimination Act, because he knew a huge backlash that the government was receiving from so many within the community against such changes that go to the heart of the idea of a country based on social inclusion, based on multiculturalism. But no, instead we're back here again. We're back here again debating the same old pet issues that the far right of the Liberal Party seems so fixated on. And now, of course, they've got new helpers with the light Liberals in One Nation ready and willing to support them and actually probably egging them on to do so. Well, Labor will not stand for those types of measures that break down the social inclusion of our society. We will not stand by measures that hurt some of the most vulnerable people in our society. That is why in our dissenting report we make clear the fact that we cannot support the majority of savings measures in a bill that have had such a massive effect on those that certainly need our protection. Now, of course, Labor has been very constructive, and we secured a number of amendments that result in the government caving in and dropping its baby bonus payment, amendments that provide $800 million in funding secured for ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, over 5 years. We got the amendments for the energy supplement measure to protect those pensioners and people on New Start allowance. And we also, very importantly, worked hard to protect Labor's childcare dental scheme. I know a scheme used so often and importantly so in my home state of Tasmania, by having that removed from the legislation. It doesn't just stop, of course, as I said, at attacking some of the vulnerable people in our community that this bill does at its very heart, as it does, but it actually then goes on to attacking children who need, at the first stages in their lives, the best start possible. And if that means accessing a dentist, because we all know without good hygiene, dental hygiene, it sets us up for everything else in life. If you can have good teeth and good dental hygiene, you are going to then have that opportunity to get a good job and have those opportunities presented to you. But that is something, of course, the government wants to get rid of. Why? Because it comes all back to this user-pays system ideology that this government is based on. And that is, if you've got a big fat wallet, you can afford to pay it. If you don't, then too bad for you. Well, that dog-eat-dog attitude is not Australia. That is not the Australian way. It may be the American way. We all know how their health system has gone down and the attempts made by the former President Barack Obama to change it. But that is not the Australian way. The Australian way is that we provide for all. We provide a safety net for all. That was what Medicare was about, that Labor provided. That is why we have Medicare, and that's another piece of public policy legislation that this government has tried to attack. Well, these are the things that Labor stands solidly for, and that is why I'm proud to be a member of the Labor Party, because we stand up for people that no matter your background, no matter where you come from, no matter where you live, no matter your circumstances, you should be able to have the same opportunity as someone else. That's why we stand for a good, decent public education system. And this morning, I was so proud to join my Labor caucus colleagues outside the front of this Parliament House with the Leader Bill Shorten and our Deputy Leader Tanya Plibersek to stand up for Gonski, the Gonski reforms that this government certainly does not want to talk about because, again, it doesn't suit their ideological agenda. Their ideological agenda that if you've got a big wallet, if you've got lots of money, you can pay for it, and if you don't, then too bad. Well, what are they in government for? Because the whole idea for me, and being part of my party, of being in government, is to provide for people, is to provide that basic safety net for people and to build our economy. They're the two things that make our country work. Now, you would think the government would have some understanding of that, because it went to the last election with a slogan called Jobs and Growth. Well, they don't talk about jobs and growth anymore, because if you look at jobs, well, we don't want to go near jobs because they're attacking jobs. They're attacking penalty rates. Penalty rates, again, to some of the most lowest workers in the country, retail workers and hospitality workers, that will affect some 700,000 Australians. So jobs is out the window, because jobs is something they want to attack and don't care about anymore. Growth, well, growth isn't going to happen because, again, they're cutting the fundamentals to some of the most vulnerable people in the country, so they're not going to be able to spend money. That's not going to add to our economy. That's going to limit their opportunity to even get a job. So jobs and growth, you won't hear it anymore from this government, because they've completely lost the plot on that one. They've completely lost the plot, full stop, though, Mr Acting Deputy President. And that's why yesterday we had on Harmony Day the government, pick out of its hat, the reintroduction of the debate on racial discrimination, protections against race hate speech, watering those down. I mean, if this government had some kind of plan for the country, some kind of agenda for this country, it wouldn't be just picking here, picking there, introducing bills here, introducing bills there that didn't get through this place, because, of course, there's not much consultation that goes on with any of us. But also because they don't fit with any plan and any strategy for our country. It's such a disappointment that with the change of leadership this government went through, from former Prime Minister Abbott to now Prime Minister Turnbull, we have had just a schmozzle in any plan for our future. Even those of us on this side of the House thought that things would change. We actually thought that we had now a Prime Minister that believed in climate change, that believed in marriage equality, that actually wanted to make some kind of difference, maybe even move Australia towards an Australian republic. We knew that once upon a time he certainly invested a lot in wanting to make that happen. But all of those issues, every issue that one would have thought Prime Minister Turnbull stood for, he has sold out on. He has completely sold out on. And now on this bill, he is selling out on the most vulnerable people in our country. What kind of legacy does he want to leave for this country as his term in office? Because at the moment, he's going down in history as the biggest fizzer of a Prime Minister, I think, that we have ever had, and the biggest seller-outer of his values. He certainly doesn't believe the things, I think at least, that he is doing. He is just simply hamstrung because he chooses to be hamstrung by those far-right members of his cabinet, of his party, of his caucus, and of the fringe dwellers, as I call them, in One Nation. Well, we will always, on this side of the chamber, stand up for all Australians in the hope that we will win government at the next election and be able to implement some of the ideas, the policies, the values that Labor stands for and Labor holds. Ideas and policies and values that we have been consistent on for many, many years. Things that we debate within our party, within our caucus, with the community, so that we know that we are on the right track, because we listen to people and people tell us how they're living, what's important to them. What's important to them is that their kids get a decent education, that they can access affordable health care, that they can get a decent job with decent pay and conditions. I mean, it's not rocket science to go out there and talk to people and find out what's important to them. But this is not something this government wants to do. It wants to live in a little bubble here in Canberra, away from the real people, protected by the walls in this place, and instead bring in legislation that is so out of touch to everyday Australians that it is hurting them. Well, we will fight tooth and nail for that legislation to not pass, because we want Australia to be recognised and listened to in our democratic systems, and the only way to do that is to prevent the government from getting its way in its strange ideological obsession with the bills that are currently before us today.
Thank you, Senator Singh.